Okay, so what part of what's been happening over in America, as you know, is that college kids care a lot about this issue. Among all the wars that are going on and have gone on, I graduated from Columbia 4 years ago, and I have a pretty good finger on the pulse of what kids are like and what they care about and what they believe and why. And my view is that intersectionality is the reigning philosophy when kids at a place like Columbia think about right and wrong in the world. And it basically goes white, bad, black or of color, good, male, bad, female, good, and on and on and on. And when they see Israel-Palestine, they think they are seeing an example of white people oppressing brown people. And that is the real reason they care so much about the issue. And so, one can call that anti-Semitism, but to me that seems a kind of imprecise way of talking about it, because the same kids would never really be caught, speaking ill of Jews in any other context. And like in 4 years at Columbia, I never heard an offhand comment about Jews. But every week I heard people talking about white men, right? And so they think the Israel issue is a special case of white people, is simply an example of white people oppressing brown people. And a hypothetical I think of and would like you to comment on is, if you imagine somehow a situation, and just forgive me, just don't imagine why it's this way, just accept the hypothetical. If it were only Mizrahi Jews that were visually indistinguishable from Palestinians that populated Israel, there were no Ashkenazi Jews for whatever reason, it's hard for me to imagine that these college kids would care. I think they would see one Middle Eastern group fighting another, and it would be like the Syrian civil war to them, even though it was Jews and Muslims, right? But what they see is a European group, and that activates the only philosophy that they have through which to see the world. So my question is, why do college kids care so much about this issue?
You're asking me why your college kids care so much about this issue?
Yeah.
We think you know everything.
No, guys, no. In my podcast, when Coleman comes onto my podcast, I will ask Coleman this question, and he will give me great wisdom. What I have opinions. I don't have knowledge. You want an opinion?
Yeah. Tell us. Don't be shy. Come on.
From someone who is statistically a very mainstream, ordinary Israeli Jew. I think that you have created an academic and intellectual world. I include the American media, most of it, not all of it, obviously, that is a intellectual wasteland. And it is an intellectual just tundra, just empty place. And it is empty and deeply uncurious and convinced it knows everything about everything, essentially because, again, this is an extremely irresponsible thing for me to say, because literally both of you know more than me about this. America is a nation whose fundamental understanding and lenses for understanding the world were religious. America has secularized in those age groups and in those sense-making elites, we'll call them, as people like to call them. And so we have been at ground zero observing the founding of a new religious, not so much ideology as aesthetic. It's a non-theological religion, but it is a religion that claims to explain everything with a simple vision. It's a religion whose only question is, how should I think morally about this? And not, first, how do I understand it analytically? Even the white part, if take white European Jews of Israel, they conflate them with American Jews and don't understand that American Jews and Ashkenazi Israeli Jews have had the opposite 20th century. American Jews didn't go through the 20th century because they lived in America and were saved by America. But in 1921, Congress closed America's doors with the Emergency Quota Act, and all the rest of the Jews that didn't make it in either died or became Israelis. So leave out for a second the Mizrahim. Just the Ashkenazim. We're literally the last living Jew in the Eastern Hemisphere. What the hell's an anti-Zionist? What's the argument? The argument is what? 7 more million Jews should be dead? We should never have survived? Say it out loud. Or is your argument that there should have been other places we could go when we were fleeing? I agree. There should have been other places. If that's anti-Zionism, is the argument that Jews should have had other options other than Zionism in the 20th century, I'm an anti-Zionist. If that's what anti-Zionism is, it's a goddamn shame that they didn't. Here's the thing. That's a complaint you can take to every human alive except the Israeli Jew. Because every human alive except the Israeli Jew didn't let the Israeli Jews go anywhere else. When America's doors were open, 95% of Jews fleeing Eastern Europe, fleeing 1,300 pogroms, 250,000 dead, fleeing decade after decade after decade of increasingly anti-Semitic laws, pushing Jews out of universities, out of professions, out of areas, entire areas to live. Over those decades, 95% of them chose America. 3% chose other places, 2% became Zionist. It was when the doors shut to everywhere else on earth, America, Canada, Britain, Australia, Brazil, Argentina, France, who didn't pass a quota for immigration at the time. Canada's was 0, a flat 0. It's easy to remember. It's really convenient. Those are the Jews who became Israelis. So, the scale of ignorance, just profound ignorance, is shocking, and it has nothing. Nobody experiences their ignorance as somehow limiting their ability to decide whether I should live or die. In other words, in this progressive student campus imagination, there's a popularity contest underway, a moral popularity contest, where the one deemed less moral or immoral loses its legitimacy, which is a fascinating word to apply to a human society. What does it mean, right? Loses its right to what? Exist? Loses its right to what? It's an astonishing shrinking of the subject you are looking at into your own extraordinarily shallow moral cartoon. We're not just living through the birth of a new religion. We're living through the birth of the dumbest religion ever founded. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, when they were founded, went through processes of others and interpreting the world and understanding these kinds of moral equations, and they did it in 1,000 times more sophisticated and humane ways than this incredible ignorance that has just overwhelmed your campuses. I was on a bunch of campuses over the last 9 months on speaking tours, and I sometimes got to speak to protesters. Harvard Law, there was a really fun little protest in the middle of my talk. I enjoyed it very much. The last thing you want to be is the Israeli speaker on college campuses that doesn't get a protest anywhere, right? Because then, you're a nobody. And in my conversations with these protesters, what astonished me wasn't that they have strong opinions. The fact is, you should be worried about this war. You should be worried about all the wars. There are thousands of dead kids in Gaza. The numbers Hamas gives are totally made up. They pull them out of whole cloth. They just completely, they don't even pretend to count. But even the best case Israeli numbers, the best case for Israel, the lowest possible death toll for Israel in this moral popularity contest, we're talking about 4,000 dead kids. In other words, there's no question that Gaza should be on the agenda. And it should be moral, and you should be skeptical, and you should come to Israel with demands. But they're amazingly uncurious people who are doing this. I come to them and I say to them, my complaint to you isn't that you're anti-Israel. I had this conversation with some New York Times people. It's that you're uncurious, right? The part of Hamas that crossed the border on October 7 was trained, funded, and prepared for October 7 by Iran. Iran is a country that has no border with Israel and absolutely no interest in Israel. So why is it spending a double-digit percentage of its GDP on destroying Israel? Just as an analytical diagnostic question, explain. What? It's a huge thing happening in the world. Why is it happening? There is no curiosity, not among the students, not among the sense-making elites, not among the professors. It's an entire society built out, pretending to care about knowledge, but sacrificing that knowledge for moral uniformity, conformity, purity. I don't know what to call it. So I am much worse than, angry. I have written them off entirely. All of these students and all of their screaming, they're not curious. about why Hamas would spend 17 years building those tunnels, and why Hamas isn't more worried about Gazan civilian deaths than the Israelis. And why, Egypt, when we took the Philadelphia corridor, the Egyptian high command was very upset because a lot of the corrupt money that comes through Gaza from the Qataris gets to the Egyptian officers, and they didn't want us to stop their smuggling operations to Hamas. And so, they joined the genocide case of South Africa at the ICJ. Egypt didn't think there was a genocide until it was costing Egyptian officials cash. Then they thought there was a genocide. B, they shut down the Rafah border crossing to aid at a time when it was the main aid crossing. In other words, in the view of the Arab world, and nobody cared in the Middle East, to everyone this made sense, you punish Palestinians by limiting aid as a way of punishing these. How do you punish Israelis? By punishing Palestinians. Nobody is curious about these dynamics. Now, we might be monsters, okay? I constantly complain in Hebrew about Israel, where it matters. It doesn't so much matter in English. There's plenty of people doing it. But the uncuriosity, to me, is the heart of the matter. And so your academia is no longer academic on these questions. It's no longer an academia. It's doing something else. There's some other function.